this woman built a really beautiful home. It might have been in Decentraland and then sold it for a good amount. And it might have been in the Sandbox. I think someone paid a lot to live next to Snoop Dogg because, they want to be his neighbor.
Hey friends, welcome to Smart Venture Podcast, the best information for future CEOs. Starting a company is easy, but growing and managing it is hard. In this podcast, we sit down with the best founders, experienced leaders, and investors in tech and relevant space to give you the best tips to grow your company and grow yourself. Some of our most popular episodes are about crypto founders and investors. Check out our new podcast called Keeping Up with Crypto on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and give it a 5-star. This episode is brought to you by Momento NFT. Momento NFT is a direct-to-fan social NFT app that allows fans to own viral moments from their favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets, autographed merchandise, and more. As a creator, you can easily create valuable images and video NFTs of your best social content. And as a fan, you can own viral moments from your favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets. Momento NFT is backed by Animoca brand Benza and Mark Pincus. Check out the app available on App Store and Google Play.
How's it going?
Hi, Rex. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
So I actually prepared a Taylor Swift song, and then I wasn't really sure if StreamYard was gonna let me play. So this is supposed to be your introductory song. So
Well,
I guess
thank you. You know me
yeah,
well already.
reference Taylor Swift in literally every article, you will fit it in. So I'm just
I
this has
always
to.
try to think of a better creator to use a better example, but she's always top of mind for me. I'm a huge fan. B, she's kind of represents a lot of different interesting trends in the creator world of, she's fighting hard to earn back ownership over her art, which I think is a great metaphor and theme for a lot of the shifts that we'll talk about from Web 2 to Web 3. So she often is a good example, aside from me being a huge fan too. So.
Yeah, wait, so I have a question for that. So what about Taylor Swift besides she is such a great role model for all of us to basically fight with
Mhm.
your boss, but not your boss, but the company,
Yeah.
the higher power. Curious, what about her that kind of attracted to you in the first place?
It's a good question. I think songwriting skill and the sort of breadth of her ability to create different kinds of music. So I was talking about this with a friend recently where Adele's album came out in the fall, and I really like Adele. I went to her concert for 25, but I will say, and I'll stand by it, my hot take is that every Adele song sounds pretty similar. And I think one thing I admire about Taylor is that every song is very different, and so she can do everything from pop to slow kind of ballads to sort of exciting other things. So, I think every album has a sonically different sound. And then also, I truly believe she's kind of the songwriter or poet of our generation. And I'll stand by that. So if you listen to some of the lyrics in Folklore or Evermore, it's pretty incredible, just some of the turns of phrase. I actually, over Christmas, made a guide to Taylor Swift's music in Notion for my family because they were like, oh, I don't get it. And I was like, you have to listen. Here are the best songs. Here are the best lyrics. Here's what Cardigan is about. Here are the three lyrics from the song to pay attention to. And I think I'm going to post it on TikTok just to kind of poke fun at how ridiculous it was that I spent time over the holidays when I was home with my family making this guide. But maybe it'll be useful to other people who are trying to get their families to become Swifties.
Wow, I'm so excited. I actually want to see the guide. I don't even know there's a guide to the music. I thought that's called Spotify playlist, but anyway, that's so cool. So I think I have to say you are such a great creator yourself. You have been really active on Instagram, and then I saw some of your TikToks, and then you have definitely one of my favorite newsletters called Digital Native. I feel it's super easy to consume. I'm curious when you're thinking about becoming a creator yourself, what was some thoughts goes into it, and then were you trying out a different platform because you invest in this sector, or did you try it out because of your genuinely trying to I guess make a name for yourself in the creator ecosystem as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's kind of a creator in different ways. I actually kind of like to separate out the concepts of creator and creator economy, which is something that I think it was a distinction that I first heard Jack Conte, who's the founder of Patreon, and Dylan Field of Figma make when they were chatting once, where it was kind of, we're all creators. If you post tweets, if you post on Instagram, you're creating. We're all kind of the lifeblood of the internet. But there is a distinction between being part of the creator economy, which is when you're, earning income for that or sort of monetizing your creations. So back in the early day, I wouldn't even say I was a creator. It was more like influencer on Instagram, where I would do sponsored posts, and that was sort of my first foray into actually earning income. And then I stopped doing that. It didn't feel super authentic to me. And I think the sort of arsenal of tools available to creators back then was smaller than it is today. And I realized, I'm not nearly talented enough to be a creator for a living. So, I'm a venture investor and spend a lot of time meeting great entrepreneurs and creators who are much more talented than I am, and hopefully being a partner to them. But it is something that brings me joy, and I really enjoy writing. I enjoy learning in public. I'm not very good at TikTok and don't make too many TikTok videos, but it's a fun thing to experiment with. And so I think it's just the cool part of the internet is you get to unlock your own self-expression and then sort of be vulnerable in sharing those with other people. And sometimes someone is moved by or inspired by or affected by your work.
Yeah, for sure. Like I have to say, like I feel like you mentioned like, you're an influencer on Instagram in like a very early stage. I think that's like kind of an understatement. You do have a lot of followings, and I feel like you also post a lot of really cool, like kind of like personalized things now. Like you share your journey with your partner and stuff like that. And I'm curious, like when you mentioned about this shift from beginning from like, the Kylie Jenner figure
Mhm.
to like Charlie D'Amelio, like I feel like that's really interesting. I'm curious, like why do you feel like this shift like was happening in
Yeah.
the
Um, yeah, what I mean by that shift is sort of almost a shift from aspiration to relatability. So, if we think of even 5 years ago, I mean, internet culture moves quickly in Gen Z culture, millennial culture, but Kylie Jenner was sort of the person. She was in vogue, 5 years ago, and the Kardashians writ large, where really their personas are all about aspiration. It's actually not that different than like a Marilyn Monroe or, Angelina Jolie, celebrities of yesteryear, where their whole persona was, in the film era, you literally saw someone larger than life. You saw them on a 30-foot screen. Whole celebrity appeal was them being bigger than reality. And you see them on a red carpet, and there's not much kind of authenticity built into that. And what's been interesting is as internet tools and sort of software tools to create things like TikTok apps or editing tools online, have become more broadly available and accessible to people. It's changed what that culture is and the kinds of content that people create. And Charlie D'Amelio is your kind of girl next door on TikTok, where she was literally a suburban teenager in Connecticut who's like 15 years old. And part of her appeal was like, that could be me. She's posting silly videos dancing in her bedroom, and there's nothing sort of quote unquote special about her other than she's a talented dancer and it sort of has a knack for social media. But she wasn't too unrelatable for people, and so that was part of her appeal. And I think that's marked sort of the rise and fall of different kind of eras of internet culture over the last 5 years. I think Taylor Lorenz, way back in probably like 2016 or 2017, wrote a piece in the Atlantic called "The Instagram Aesthetic is Over." And I think she faced a lot of backlash for that. People were like, "No, Instagram's not over," but what she meant was a lot of the kind of latte art and pretty murals and the Color Factory and Museum of Ice Cream and a lot of these kinds of millennial aesthetic we saw online was moving away, and you've seen it replaced by the photo dump with Gen Zs. And even my content on Instagram has shifted a bit from, I was totally guilty of that kind of more kind of performative side of social media that a lot of my generation grew up with. We were treated our feeds as sort of filtered versions of reality because they literally were filtered by the products. Instagram emerged with sort of beautifying filters and showing this highlight reel of your life. And as I've adapted, I've had to learn from younger people and people even more digitally native than me, how to be more vulnerable and authentic and 100% yourself online.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, like I also see this trends like happening on Twitter. So you see like of course there's like the Elon Musk of the world, like they're
Hmm.
super powerful and like super successful. And there is a lot of Twitter creators that are like, they're just like an employee at a tech company, but they have like gigantic amount of followings. I'm curious, like as a creator yourself, like what do you think like are like the appeal of I guess like the quote unquote everyday person on Twitter? And then like what do you think makes a person succeed on these social media platforms going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think even with Elon Musk and other people on Twitter, you're seeing just people like understanding people better and removing the sort of veneer that you had. The You could think of almost culture being filtered through this lens of media or gatekeepers in the past. Of you only interact with someone. Maybe someone like Elon has to go through his PR person at Tesla, and now he can tweet. Or you only see people when they have done an interview with the New York Times and it's been edited by an editor and gone through a bunch of different steps, and then finally you read that curated polished product, which a lot of people have warped and touched and distorted. And now, for better or worse, often worse, I mean, you do see the full kind of reality of humanity of people bringing 100% of themselves online and having this megaphone in their pocket everywhere they go. um, and I think that's a great thing. I think, there's a quote that I use often from Barry Diller, who I really respect. He's the founder of IAC and was the CEO of, Fox and Paramount and sort of 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But back in 2005, the same year YouTube was started, he said there's not that much creativity in the world. There are only so many people who have the talent to create these kind of entertainment products, and there aren't people hiding in closets, waiting to get out and share their things with the world, which turned out to be, a very wrong statement because, and I think you'd be the first to admit, but it turned out that there was a lot of talent, sort of latent talent in the world, and a lot of people who were waiting to be unlocked by what the internet has done. And I think broadly that's a good thing. But of course, we also have to understand the repercussions of what it means to kind of live in algorithmic echo chambers and what.
One thing I find really interesting about this kind of like shift is like it's sort of becoming like a marketing competition, as like when you're building a following on the internet, one
Hmm.
part is like having a lot of consistency. So essentially you're tweeting every day, not you personally, but like everybody's tweeting every
Hmm.
day, everybody's like posting new things on the internet, and then like trying to get as much cloud per se as possible. And like I'm curious, like for me, like my observation is like it's sort of becoming like a marketing competition for the artists. Although
Hmm.
like some people have great talents with or great voice, like great singing skill, but technically a lot of it is like building an audience, like engaging with the community. What like do you agree with like the fact that like people should be like marketing themselves like that, becoming their priority to succeed in today's age, or do you feel like not?
One problem, how do you deal with sort of the emotional highs and lows of being a creator? And I think you could extend that to how do you deal with sort of the emotional highs and lows of being an internet user in 2022, which is, 4.5 or 5 billion people in the world. It's like two-thirds of the world is on the internet, and most of them on social media. And I think it's hard. I mean, I think, one thing that worries me is, young people growing up, and if I have kids down the road, how I would want them to interact with other people online. And there are so many great parts of that 24/7 online access, but also I think a lot of guardrails that we still need to build around emotions and mental health. And you can see, rates of depression and suicide going far up in younger people, often due to this kind of overexposure. And so it's something I think about a lot. I think one big turning point for me in the last, 15 years of my kind of digital life was learning that metrics like likes and comments and followers aren't metrics by which you want to measure your life. And it can be dangerous and a slippery slope to measure your self worth based on things like that. So for me, I actually took about a year off of Instagram. Probably in like 2017, 2018, I just realized that it was kind of becoming too central to my identity. And, I was constantly, worried about whether a post would reach the same level of engagement or likes. And, I was lucky economically that it wasn't my main job and I could take that time off. But I think it helped me a lot. I think I lost like 50,000 followers or something. And I think Ninja, who's the biggest Twitch streamer at the time, used to tweet about, I think he went on his honeymoon and he lost, several thousand subscribers on his honeymoon. And that shows that, it's pretty challenging to be a creator and actually take, PTO or mental health days. But for me, that was an important shift in understanding that I'd rather measure my interactions with other people by quality rather than quantity, and also try to remove myself from some of the noise. And that led me to spend more time online writing, sort of long form writing on Substack, for instance, and less sort of on visual based mediums that I didn't think were as good for my mental health.
Yeah, for sure. Like I really like your new article about mental health, and I'm curious when you are writing these like weekly newsletter, like you have a lot of insights,
Hmm.
and you are like a machine. Like I feel like you're like literally the most knowledgeable person in this field. I've heard about
Thank
like
you.
so many random things, or like not random, but like the most like innovative things that I've like never heard of from anybody else. Curious, how do you keep up with all these new trends? And then like how do you kind of build up this system for yourself to kind of a absorb everything new, and b like having a way to like maintain it and then becoming your own thoughts, or like processing and digesting it and like putting it out on the internet through your newsletter? Like, how do you do that? I'm like just mind blown because like I'm so amazed at the issue.
Well, thank
Anyway,
you. Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the brief history of Digital Native, the Substack I write, and how it kind of got started. Probably almost two. It's about 2 years old now, probably. So it was right before the pandemic. So I was a little early to like the Substack craze of like the memes of like everyone has a Substack. I think it was like January or February 2020 that I started it. And I actually started it originally because I like to read a lot. I read a ton of articles every week, and I was bombarding my friends and my partner and my family with sort of the most interesting things that I've read. And so I was like, look, like maybe I'll do kind of a curated best of the week at the end of the week, and I will, send them the top 10 articles they should read so that I'm not constantly kind of one-off texting them articles. And so it started more as summarizing news that I was reading and topics that were interesting to me. Then I started adding sort of a more kind of original piece of writing. At first it was kind of more summarizing some of my favorite writers, like Ben Thompson and Lee Jin and Packy McCormick. And then I was like, okay, like all I'm doing here is like rewriting or sharing their ideas and what they're thinking. And like, I want to be known for sort of my own thinking and own taking on takes on things. And so I got rid of the sharing other people's articles and writing, and tried to just do original writing, which often, builds on or alludes to their pieces. But that was probably 6 months into the process, and it kind of took off from there. And it's a great way to sort of synthesize thoughts. I think writing, especially sort of long form prose writing, forces you to really think through holes in your arguments. I think it forces you to think critically about whether you have all of your ideas together and have done your research and done your work to find a point of view. So it's been a kind of rewarding piece of my week every week that keeps me honest and makes sure I'm continuing to learn.
yeah, a lot of your content are, I feel like it's very original, like compared to like I also subscribe to like a lot of people that you've mentioned, it's like their newsletter or like their content. I feel like a lot of your videos are actually like pretty interesting on your own. I'm curious, like, how do you kind of like put together your own way of thinking? Like, when you're writing these newsletters, do you do journaling like every day? Like Monday, you journal like a paragraph, and then Tuesday you journal a paragraph, or do you do them on Monday? You create a structure. This is like the blank that I need to fill in.
Yeah, I'll talk about sort of how I come up with ideas and then how I structure the writing. So I come up with ideas. I mean, I loosely have in my head a range of topics that I'd like to dive deeper in the future. And so what I do is I create a Notion doc where I've got sub pages for future topics that I'd like to write about. So right now, like I'm not sure what's in there, but I'm interested in, okay, maybe I would want to write about Gen Z behaviors again, especially around like sustainability or like how they're viewing climate.
Mhm.
Maybe I'd be interested in writing about the Web3 future of work and the different jobs people have in the digital economy. Maybe I want to do another piece on play to earn gaming and dive deeper into that. And then what I'll do over the next kind of couple of weeks is, as I find an article or a chart or someone's interesting quote relevant to one of those, I put it into that Notion doc just so that by the time I go to start writing, I have something kind of to start with, and then I can kind of frame it into an argument or point of view and write. And I tried to time box my writing, and so I publish the newsletter every Wednesday, but I also have a full time job that keeps me a lot busier, and so I try to time box it to writing on. Usually it's Tuesday evening. Sometimes I'll work on it on Sunday if it's going to be a particularly busy week. Often it's Tuesday night, and much to my kind of partner's chagrin, but I try to really keep it to condense to just a couple hours because it's not my full time job, and it amplifies and augments a lot of the thinking I get to do and am privileged to do in my job as a venture investor at Index. But I think I also want to make sure that it doesn't bleed into more important things.
For sure. I think another thing about you is like I saw you were hosting like a creator chat on like
Hmm.
Index YouTube channel, and then you have a lot of like really high impact like creator friends. How do you kind of build up this network? And then, venture is also like a really network driven business. Like what are some actions you took to kind of like maintain these relationship that you kind of created for yourself?
Yeah, I think the best ideas come from exposure to people who have different lives than you. And it also creates a much richer and more rewarding life. And so I try to have a lot of friends and contacts who are sort of outside of the tech bubble or Silicon Valley bubble. And, often those are creative people. Sometimes they have nothing to do with tech or business at all. Sometimes they have nothing to do with online creation, but those are probably where my best kind of most interesting ideas come from. And so that's one goal of just having exposure to lots of different people, and I think that's where sort of the most creative ideas come from. And how do I meet them? I mean, I try to just meet new people. Thankfully, a big part of my job is meeting new people, and they introduce me to other new people, and sometimes you connect with people. But no, I'm privileged to do that, and it's I think kind of like how I say writing or reading fiction is the best sort of business book or that you can read. It's sort of, at least for consumer tech, it frees up your mind and opens creativity and kind of changes your perspective on things, that you take a new lens through which to view the world. I think the same thing with meeting new people. It makes you more creative and open to new things.
For sure. When it comes to like in terms of like meeting new people and then kind of navigating the world of like venture as well as like creator, and now even like in crypto, and curious like who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to your own career decisions?
I'm probably overly indexed on my partner, Ian, who I've been with 6 years. And he works in product at Fair, which is a B2B marketplace. And so we've learned together a lot about the startup world and consumer tech and marketplaces, and sort of have built a life in that together. But, I think he's probably my main advisor and role model. Both of our families love us and support us, but have really no concept of what we do day to day. My dad's always like, "Why are the markets down?" And I'm like, "Dad, that's not the kind of investing I do." But he's learned since then. But I think, it's nice to have a partner who understands deeply my world, and I his. And so in my parents' wedding vows, my mom said that she and my dad share an intellectual intimacy, which I always liked as a turn of phrase. And so, I'm lucky to have that in my life partner. And so he's probably my main advisor. And then a lot of friends are entrepreneurs or investors or creators, and there are a handful of really close friends as well that I get advice from.
When it comes to like having your own opinion as well as like creating content, like you have to kind of like consume a lot of content, what are some really interesting like information diet that you have like throughout your days these days?
Yeah, I try to consume a lot and read a lot. And so I save a lot of articles down. I save them to Pocket, which is just a service where, on the weekend I can open Pocket and have, a dozen articles I save during the week to kind of read through on a Saturday or Sunday morning. There are a lot of publications that I'll go to. I'm old school. I still usually go to the website versus, getting news from Twitter. So I go to, New York Times really often. I usually read that in the evening. I read The Atlantic all the time, New York Magazine and New Yorker. So those are more kind of like world news. I read TechCrunch and Wired and Protocol for tech news, Hollywood Reporter, Vanity Fair for kind of more entertainment. So lots of those different publications. There's also a great kind of media aggregator online called Redef, and it's redef.com. And they often have sort of a bunch of interesting articles. And so sometimes I'll go through once or twice a day and just open a bunch of the ones and save them in tabs that I hope to get to one day to read later. And then of course I subscribe to lots of Substacks and newsletters and writing, and try to kind of work through those in my inbox every day and get to inbox zero.
Yeah, I feel like right now there's like a saying called like, bundling and unbundling. So a lot of great writers from each magazine or each just like traditional publications have their own Substacks.
Mhm.
And curious, like right now, because of everyone is because they can get like basically they can get their really loyal following to follow them in their own inbox, and then they can get paid a lot more. Do you see that happening in the next 20 years, since like, right now creator economy or creator as a market is like huge, so like they are able to actually get these support from the readers? Do you feel like this is going to keep happening in the future, or do you feel like at one point they have to, go back to becoming like a team again, to like collaborating with other people?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest shifts of our time, of this shift towards self-employment, or at least you see people kind of come of age with the desire for more autonomy, more flexibility, more financial upside. This week I wrote about a piece called Nomadland, Banksy and the Future of Work in Web3, and this is another good example of, I had this idea where over Christmas, I watched Nomadland with my family, which won Best Picture last year, and it's basically this kind of very kind of eye-opening and jarring portrait of the death or decay of corporate America. And so it follows nomads who are often played by real life nomads who live in a van and drive around the country. And most of them have been kind of chewed up and spat out by corporate America, and it's this portrait of the American dream of like a 9 to 5, and you make a certain living and have your white picket fence and 2.4 kids and your car in the driveway. That is harder and harder to achieve for a lot of people. And so Gen Z's came of age with first the Great Recession. They watched their parents or grandparents lose their jobs, then they entered the workforce, and the pandemic happens, and there's just so much distrust in institutions and corporations, and trust is shifting to people. And so a lot of it is in the gig economy or the creator economy. I mean, all of these different ways where it's really a shift of freelancing and self-employment. And I can say I take my own kind of destiny into my own hands with my own hustle and savvy, and share in my own upside as well, instead of renting my time to a corporation. And you alluded to, we've seen this in writing and Substack, and we've seen the kind of disaggregation of news media and everyone kind of appearing in your inbox with their own newsletter and getting paid for that. I think that's a big shift. I think that'll continue. I think it depends on the person. There are also people who like the structure and support of an organization. And so I imagine what we'll see is a lot of these self-employed people will find another kind of happy medium where there might be guilds of writers, or a DAO of writers in a Web3 future, where people support each other, and you can still sort of combine for paid time off, for mental health support, or some of the things that our infrastructure of work is very built around for employers and organizations, but that we can still have a little more autonomy and flexibility and share our own economic upside, but not lose the community benefits that really our infrastructure of work has.
That's super cool, like, and super interesting. Like, so a month ago, you wrote an article on Web3, right? Like, you mentioned like Web3 is sort of like the mechanics behind the vending machine, and
Hmm.
like a regular person probably won't even notice like the shift between like Web2 to Web3, and or like they probably don't know what exactly it is. Can you elaborate more on that, and like what exactly is Web3 for you, and for like a regular person, what are things that we're seeing, and then what are things that we may not really be aware of?
I think my basic thesis there is that most people won't and shouldn't have to understand a lot of the complexities that Web3 has. And we're still in a day where, the early adopter phase, where we haven't quite crossed the chasm in a lot of ways. And so a lot of the people who are deep in the Web3 movement do understand, what the difference between fungible and non-fungible is, or what a blockchain is and how it works. But that isn't necessarily, nor should it be, the path to billions of people adopting Web3 and becoming users. And so, an analog I would say is, with the World Wide Web, most people don't understand the different protocols that they are using when they sort of go click a hyperlink and move around to different websites. And they shouldn't. It lives in a nice kind of user friendly interface. The vending machine example you gave, so that was actually the man who coined, the cryptographer who coined the term smart contract in the 90s, used the example of a vending machine. So smart contracts are a key sort of foundation for NFTs, for instance, and they effectively program in a specific set of rules to execute a transaction. And vending machines operate in much the same way, in that there are certain rules in a vending machine. If I put in enough money and then type a certain number, the vending machine will spit out the good that I selected. And most people don't understand the inner workings of a vending machine. Like, unless you're a vending machine repairman, you probably don't need to. And the same thing will hold true for Web3, where it's like, unless you're a smart contract engineer, which is maybe the analog for that, you might not need to understand the inner workings of how things are operating. But, everything should be intuitive enough that everyone is able to be a participant in Web3 with familiar concepts. Like, people understand scarcity, they understand economic upside, they understand what owning a token might be and owning a share in something is. And so I think we'll take a lot of those familiar Web 2 concepts, or just kind of human concepts, and apply them to Web 3 in a way that's a lot more accessible to more people.
What does Web3 mean for you? So like I read, like this is another newsletter I subscribe to. So basically they were saying Web2 is essentially like, the Google or Airbnb. So like Web1 is like you consume the information, like and then Web2 is like you can interact with the information, like you can comment on something or you can post your own thing. What exactly is Web3? I also consulted with my like really crypto driven friends. Like they were saying like by what is Web3, you mean what is not Web3? Because they were saying like our current world is essentially Web3. And
Mhm.
like curious, like as a regular person, what exactly does that mean for all of us? And I guess like what are the opportunities in this space for, either creators or like just like a regular person?
I mean, I'll be very I'll give the quick overview, and then we can dig deeper. But a lot of people think of Web 1 as sort of 1995 to, or 1990, maybe even to 2005 era or so of the web, where basically, you can think of Google as the big winner there, where most of us were passive consumers, where you read the internet, you go to Yahoo, you go to Google, information is curated, but we're mostly just passive consumers. And then Web 2 comes along around 2005 to 2020 or so, and we're still in it in many ways. But instead of just reading, you can also write. So you read and write, but you interact. So user generated content comes along. We as all creators get to become the sort of lifeblood of the internet, and that we're creating the content on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and Roblox and Discord and all of these great companies where we're producing content that fuels the internet. And Web3, the vision there is, instead of just reading and writing, users also get to own, and it's the ownership economy, as Jesse Walden would say, where we all sort of have an economic stake, where instead of just profits flowing to the sort of intermediaries or incumbents or these big tech companies in Web2, the big winners are Facebook and Snapchat and YouTube. We all are the beneficiaries, and so we own a piece of that. And so what does that mean in practice? I think the pure vision is decentralization, where there isn't sort of a centralized entity taking power. I think that's probably not going to happen in a full form. I think people do like some degree of centralization, and some degree of centralization is often necessary. But I think there will be a user ownership component and users sharing in the upside of what they create. And so the next kind of iconic consumer tech companies will be networks, which are the most kind of powerful invention of the web, but they'll layer on economics to those networks, where we all kind of share an economic upside, and own pieces of our own creations.
So let me rephrase what you're saying. So you're saying like,
Mhm.
so similar to your like Taylor Swift example from your newsletter, it's like you're her earliest fan. So you
Mhm.
should be your kind of like income or like your finance should be tied with that because of you kind of emotionally investing a lot into this person a lot earlier than everybody else. And like, so basically the financial upside is like your finance is really tied to this Web3 structure. So curious, what you mentioned about like the network, what's the difference between like the current network, let's say like, LinkedIn or Facebook, like those are the current networks. Like what's the difference in like a Web3 network versus like the work that we currently live in?
Well, yes, I mean, LinkedIn is a centralized organization where all the profits and benefit flow to LinkedIn, and it provides a service, but we're not benefiting from being a network participant or me creating content there. I might be capturing social capital, but there's no economic capital or real dollars there. And so if we think of Web3, it kind of is this user-owned network, or next generation, where I'll use my Taylor Swift example since you brought her up, but think if I'm an early fan of Taylor Swift right now, a record label signs Taylor Swift, they take her ownership of her masters, and then they own that in perpetuity, which she's now re-recording her albums to reclaim her art. But there's basically this intermediary that takes the profits, and then she'll go off, and I, as an early fan, will not be treated any differently than the sort of most recent fan who discovers her. So in the future, what if she launched Taylor Token or a set of NFTs early on that kind of were tickets to access her fan group? As she grows in fandom and size and acclaim, those tokens or NFTs will grow alongside her, and so the fans share in the economic value created. And so what does that mean? Maybe a next generation LinkedIn creates, a LinkedIn token in the early days, and it's owned by the users. Maybe it's a DAO. Those early believers share in the upside as that token appreciates, and also can vote on governance decisions. And instead of, LinkedIn deciding to make a change to the site or to shut someone out or these decisions, it's actually almost like a democracy you can think of for DAOs, where it's user decided and people vote on it, and it's really kind of owned by the people.
Yeah, for sure. So like I think there's 2 points that's super interesting. One part is about Taylor Swift like issuing a token, right? So you
Hmm.
wrote about like a person named Alex. He is a 23 years old guy. He tokenized himself from, I believe, somewhere in Europe, France or something like, and then he moved
Hmm.
to the Bay Area,
Yep.
right? Because we were selling like 10K a tweet or like 30K an intro to the future net worth of his like friends or something. So curious, like for this to happen, like, do you feel like everybody can socialize like social token themselves or tokenize themselves? Like, is this like a just like because it's so early on, so it can have some sort of like buzzwordiness, so people will buy into it because of it's so interesting.
Hmm.
This is like one question, and then the second question is about like decentralization. So as you mentioned, like let's say if like in the future LinkedIn wants to kick someone out and like the LinkedIn DAO would be like voting if a person should stay or not. I think those votes can be easily swayed because when I purchase like Grayscale.eth, like I think like when I try to claim the coin from ENS and then like they ask me who should I like be the voting person for my like my rights or whatever. I pick myself, of course. But I'm just saying like there's a lot of people don't know what to pick, so they just go with like whatever. So I feel like that's more crazier when you think about, people could pursuing a bunch of people to vote for a president, right? Like curious, like
Hmm.
how do you see this happening in general?
So to take the first one, I think, my thesis is that not everyone will have a social token. So you give the example of Alex Mazmej, who is a really incredible entrepreneur and interesting person, where he was based in Paris during the pandemic. And then he basically was like, I would like to move to Silicon Valley and start my company there, but I don't have the financial means to do so. So he creates Alex token. He's able to sell shares in his future income. So it's kind of like an income share agreement. And
Mhm.
token holders, people who hold Alex token, get access to him, like access to his private newsletter and a Telegram chat and, advice from him or a retweet on Twitter. And so it does create this kind of interesting exclusive access to him and different perks. But he's also able to raise $20,000 by selling a share of his future income and move to San Francisco. So it's a really interesting mechanism for sort of bootstrapping your rise. So like, we go back to Taylor, like instead of signing with the record label, maybe you can almost like a Kickstarter like crowdfund where your early believers support you and then they'll get rewarded later on for their creations. And so there are many interesting applications of this happening. There's a woman who used the service Mirror to basically, she wrote about that she wanted to start writing a book. In a prior life, she might have gotten an advance from a publisher or something, or she would just take 6 months off work with no income to create the book. But here, people were able to say, oh, like, I will support you. I will pay for you to write this book because I really want to read it. And in return, I'm going to get, 1% of your sales or something like that. And so she was able to kind of crowdfund with this economic incentive for future income. So lots of interesting ways to do that. Going back to will everyone have it? I'm not a believer that my grandmother or my dad even or my friend down the street, my neighbor, will have a social token. Maybe you'll be able to buy Rex token, probably not. Like I don't think I would have one. I do think people who make a living off of curating a community or having parasocial relationships with people will have a token. And so maybe it's akin to whether you have a YouTube channel today or a Twitch channel. Not everyone streams on Twitch, not everyone posts YouTube videos, but a good portion of the population does. And that could be a new kind of arsenal in their toolkit to earn income and have a stronger connection to fans. An example of that would be yesterday, the Nelk Boys, who have about 12 million subscribers on YouTube, launched an NFT collection, their first, which is effectively like their IPO, because they launched 10,000 of these Nelk tokens and 10,000 people bought them. And, they bought them for like, I think $2,300 each. So the Nelk Boys were able to raise $23 million in 10 minutes. And these tokens will essentially be tickets. So like gated passes to the Nelk universe of the future. And so right now, maybe that's, a Discord chat or exclusive YouTube content or merchandise. In the future, they have this big vision for it to be in real life IRL experiences as well. But it's a really interesting way of someone forging an even stronger economic connection with their fans, and their fans being able to share in future upside from, someone that they really believe in and evangelize. So that's the answer to the first question. Second one, kind of unrelated, around decentralization. I think you were saying, will it be fully decentralized? Will people, actually all vote in DAOs? I think the answer is no. I think, we've already seen in DAO behavior that a lot of times it almost mimics our representative democracy, where people say, your average person is not going to want to go through the sort of, proposals and read the fine print and make a decision. And so I might say, I'm not super informed on this. I'm super busy. Like, Grace, you are going to be, I trust you. You know more about this topic. Like, why don't you vote and elect you as a representative? And so democracies are often a good kind of metaphor for DAOs, in that often as humans, we're both lazy and we like to represent or have trusted representatives to sort of make decisions for us. We like to outsource decision making. And so I think we'll see a lot of those sort of same structures and behaviors emerge in these kinds of decentralized worlds. And that's probably a good thing. It's human nature. I think there's still more accountability built in, but we're going to have the same problems that we've seen offline. And I think there's still a lot to figure out around governance and decentralization.
Yeah, I'm still like processing Nelk Boys just launch something. I mean, like they launch Happy Dad Seltzer, and then they launch like everything they launched, they just like instantly sold out. And this makes me think about, the Nelk Boys or like Gary Vee. They are
Yep.
these kind of like influencers in our society. So for NFTs or something related to like a digital asset, that if they launch something, it's essentially just like them selling like a high ticket item, their universe, or like to their, just like anything associated with them. But what does that mean for like a regular person? I think you mentioned a really interesting stats in your newsletter. OpenSea only has around like 250K active buyers and sellers, and 70% of the volume comes from just around like 20K people. So curious, do you feel like NFT is the channel that like people should kind of like mentally or like time wise invested in? Or do you feel like this is just like a really rich people game? Since like, I don't know, it's like a really, like anything NFT related would goes with like a really high price because of the Ethereum's price or something.
We're sort of in a moment akin to 1999 or so, where, in 1999, there was a big tech bubble. Probably 90% of the startups then went to zero. Some, of course, persisted. But it didn't mean that there weren't really interesting fundamental innovations taking place. And I think we're in a similar moment today, where probably 90%, maybe 99% of the NFTs, including the ones I own, will go to zero. And so I advise people when they buy NFTs, and myself, to really only buy things where you really love the art, you really connect to that profile picture, you love the collection and what it means, and you want to support it, but not sort of speculate for an investment perspective, because I think there will be a correction. I think there's a lot of sort of irrational exuberance and excitement and frothiness right now. But that doesn't mean that the underlying technology and innovations of NFTs or other Web3 products aren't interesting and important. And so I think we'll see a shift in use cases. So, 2021 was really about art, and then it was about profile pictures. And a lot of the OpenSea volume was driven by that. I think we'll see a lot of new kinds of uses for NFTs. So, ticketing and sort of utility-based NFTs. So like the Nelk Boys are really interesting because owning this NFT is like your passport into the Nelk universe. I think that'll become more common. I think gaming NFTs and blockchain-based games will become really interesting and important, and music-based NFTs as well. So there are lots of new kind of use cases that can push us into the mainstream. Because you mentioned, it's still the very early adopter phase of crypto enthusiasts and early adopters of yet to cross the chasm if you think about the sort of view of the technology adoption cycle. But OpenSea is still over here. Crypto and Web3 are still over here. And so, what are the breakthrough use cases? Probably, I think, maybe music, maybe gaming, and then at the same time, going back to what we talked about abstracting complexity. Who are the innovative thinkers and builders and companies that will figure out ways to make it more intuitive to participate in the Web3 ecosystem and less sort of arcane and inaccessible.
Yeah, this make me thought of like yesterday I went to like this Hawaiian international market, and then like there was like this artist selling physical art. Like I actually bought a piece of physical art. I
That
bought
sounds great.
this,
Yes.
and then they gave me a free NFT. So this is like $40, and
Huh.
then like I'm like getting a free NFT, and then I'm still
Very
waiting for the owner
interesting.
to like transfer it to me. But like anyway, so this will go into our next topic, which is
See, we're getting more mainstream. Exactly. Very cool.
it's crazy. Anyway, so you mentioned like the digital wallet kind of serves a purpose of, it's similar to like the original physical wallet, which means like you carry your gym membership, you carry like a credit card, you carry like a Costco card or something, right? So I think for the digital wallet nowadays, it's kind of also just like your expensive like Prada purse or something like that, because like everyone can technically see what's in your wallet beside your actual money. So is this really safe for everybody to like link your identity to a wallet? Because on Twitter, you've seen like everybody is like changing to their name.eth or something. I know it's like a public key, so you can't really steal money from someone, but I personally think it's kind of dangerous for like everybody else to know what I own.
Hmm.
Curious, like, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I think it's very early days where their privacy is still super early. Yeah, I'm curious to put it back on you of, if you were able to choose of what's in your public wallet, what's a little more private, are there certain types of NFTs that you would think are, you want to keep more privately or publicly display?
So there's an embarrassing fact. So like I went on Unstoppable Domain. I purchased literally everything related to my name, like just like my
Hmm.
name, DAO, like Grace Gong DAO, Grace Gong DAO, like wallet, Grace Gong like DAO, like everything, because I like to invest in myself. It's embarrassing. I guess like it is kind of different. Like I think for a lot of people, they would like to show off their board apes or something, or like they could crowdfund a
Yeah.
board ape and then like change it to your profile picture, and then you see like three other people also have this profile picture because of you brought it together for like a share. I do think there's like a difference, but I don't know why I feel
Yeah.
not safe about like me purchasing like a really embarrassing domain. I just probably don't want everybody to know.
Well, I mean, a lot of, with blockchain being so publicly viewable and accessible, it's a very new kind of thing for people who are used to a lot more kind of siloed and private, behind closed doors and centralized walled gardens behaviors. I think part of it is you mentioned, people do like to flex with their wallet, what's in their wallet. I think part of that is because there's sort of this paucity of social products and places to display your NFTs. So there are really exciting things being built there. Sometimes you can go on OpenSea and there could be social products there. Coinbase's kind of new NFT marketplace will look maybe more like Instagram, they've said. Showtime, which is founded by Alex Mazmej of Alex Token, is a sort of Instagram for NFTs or a social place to display things. There's an interesting company called Gallery. So I think as you have places where you can have that flex and show off more, the need for that to happen in your wallet goes down. And so in the future, there will probably be different layers of privacy. But I do think, a huge opportunity right now is, is there a place for you to curate your collection? Maybe it's in Decentraland or a virtual world as well, but how do you make it a little more socially accessible?
Yeah, you mentioned about socially accessible, right? Like, so yesterday there was a news, is potentially Facebook and Instagram is potentially launching like an NFT marketplace or like NFT related things. And that brought us to like scarcity, right? Like, so on Roblox, there was like a person bought like a Gucci bag, and there were
Hmm.
also a person in the universe bought like a $69 million Bebo picture. So those people are really rare. Curious, like, because of its like the scarcity, and then people want to flex what's in their wallet. So that's why people are buying it. And like curious, like in the future, besides like, selling tickets or like selling an experience, like do you see this I guess like become more normalized? And like, do people really want to buy a JPEG on the internet for their profile picture for like $6,000 in the future?
Well, I think it comes back to, I mean, humans are status driven people. I think of Eugene Way's great piece, Status as a Service. I think, status is a key part of social interaction. So I think of it that way. The Roblox Gucci collaboration, that bag that someone bought in Roblox is a great example of that, where there's no utility in the game. There's no sort of point of owning that other than the luxury symbol of status. And we've seen this with Fortnite skins as well, of there's no sort of advantage in Fortnite to own certain skins, but maybe I want to flex with my Iron Man skin or my Balenciaga, collection or something like that. And so I think, it's a big part is we all have avatars and we all sort of dress our avatars and buy things for them. There are really cool companies working on this, like Genies is one of them, or Nike just bought a company called Artifact, RTFKT is how it's spelled, which does a lot of NFT digital sneakers. And so, in the future, if we're spending time in these digital realms and we all have personalities and avatars and we get to interact with other people for work and for fun and play and, walking around in the metaverse, I think it makes a lot of sense that brands that have status and value in the analog offline world will also have some status and relevance in these digital worlds. So hopefully in the future, you'll see me wearing some like really cool kind of this like rainbow like sweatshirt in the metaverse, and you can comment on it or buy it from me and resell it, and there will be a whole kind of commerce side to that.
Are you purchasing any digital land right now, like digital real estate?
I have not bought any digital land. I mean, I have a lot of friends who've bought in Decentraland, in Sandbox, in some other places. I don't own any digital real estate, but it is a really cool thing to think about. And I think I saw last year someone bought or built a digital architect was a new kind of job created. And I think this woman built a really beautiful home. It might have been in Decentraland and then sold it for a good amount. And it might have been in the Sandbox. I think someone paid a lot to live next to Snoop Dogg because, they want to be his neighbor. So, I think we're very early days when it comes to digital real estate, but you could envision digital real estate agent, digital architect, these being kind of professions of the future.
I mean, I couldn't help to think about like, living next to Snoop Dogg, since he just purchased like like Snoop Dogg, the hot dog place. Maybe it will
I
become a
saw, yeah,
hot dog
cool.
stand. I don't know. Anyway,
Mhm.
so curious, you mentioned like Gen Zs are authentic and unique, creative and self-expressive, programmatic and self-directed. You like spend a lot of time like studying Gen Z and Gen Z trends, and you're like basically I have to say, like, I'm so impressed by your end of the year review. It's sort of like the Mary
Oh,
Meeker
thanks.
style of like our generation thing. I'm curious, like, what do you see as like the biggest trends in Gen Z, and how do you think it will affect our economy or like our opportunities later on?
Good questions. I mean, Gen Z is such a horizontal kind of through line where it really cuts across every trend. So I think, it's changing social, everything's becoming social. I think, the food is becoming social, like live stream shopping and commerce is becoming more social. We've seen things like, Whatnot, for instance, or other up and comers. I think commerce is also becoming more personalized. And so, that's sort of one piece of it, but I don't know, I mean, I think of it broadly in traits. So what are the traits of Gen Z? Authentic is sort of an overused buzzword, but we've seen that, and that manifests in what people want to wear. It manifests in how people interact on Snapchat and TikTok and what they want to create. I also think self-directed and autonomy work, changes that. So we've seen this in the rise of the creator economy and gig economy and self-employment and sort of like hustle culture. So I think that's a big piece of it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of sustainability, which we touched on earlier, and climate. So there are these kind of massive behavior shifts in Gen Z's worldview. I think I wrote a piece called "A Guide to Gen Z" through memes and TikToks and different and emojis and different trends like that. So I think there's more in there, but it is a fascinating time where I think we're seeing such a massive shift in this generation that really is the first generation of digital natives, the people who grew up on the internet and haven't known a world without the internet, and we're going to see that change everything.
I think one of the interesting things I've seen is like, you were on the panel with Josh Richards, right? I also like
Hmm.
observed that like he and like his like partner Bryce Howe, so like they started like this Annie energy drink thing, and then now
Yeah.
it's like those initiatives of like
Hmm.
becoming an entrepreneur is really common in the Gen Z world. Like everybody like Miss Excel, like everybody's starting a business on the internet.
Yep.
Do you feel like people should be doing that? Because like I feel like in the end of the day, you see like Josh Richards is like still like doing the startup investing thing. And then I feel like
Yep.
from outsider observation, it's like I think Bryce Howell just like he's like still focusing a lot his energy on content, right? He started a podcast with Palm at the beginning, and then I don't really know if that's still going on. Curious when you're seeing these like everybody becoming an entrepreneur in our generation
Yep.
or like investor in our generation, do you think this will be like a consistent trend down the line, or do you feel like this is a temporary thing that everyone's like we should like just use our cloud to like the max to like
Yeah.
pull it off right now?
I think everyone I think will be a multi-hyphenate in that everyone's an entrepreneur, everyone's an investor, and instead of us having these sort of single monolithic careers for 40, 50, 60 years, it'll be much more kind of reinventing ourselves and having diversified income streams. And so I think you see that in Ani Energy, and Josh is a great example where he's a venture capitalist, he's a creator, he's a business owner of like a dozen different businesses. And so I think it'll be much more sort of people working online in these digitally native careers, but reinventing themselves again and again. And given the pace of technological change, that'll be necessary.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.